I rise today in support of Resolution 13, which, some folks, 13 might be a lucky number. Some otters, it might be an unlucky number. And we're going to talk about it being kind of an unlucky number for them here today, Mr. President. Although they're a very cuddly and fun little sea critter or sea mammal to watch, they definitely have a flip side, and we're going to get into that. So if we take a look at the kind of the history back at the end of the Ice Age, fur was the material sought to keep everybody warm as the folks moved down the coast. And then 10,000 years roll by, and along comes the Russians, and the harvest rate of sea otters, which has the highest density fur, I think, on the planet, pretty much eradicated them along the coast of Alaska. And that eradication didn't sit well over the next several decades, almost 100 years. And then there was a movement made to replant them in southeast Alaska, referring to the sea otters. In roughly 1965 and also then in 1969, there were roughly 400 sea otters brought into southeast Alaska to reconstitute this population, which was greatly sought after, and it was managed by the state at the time and done by the state. Well, as the clock ticked on, along comes the Marine Mammal Act and federal management of everything pretty much under the sun around here. So it was included. And as that population number started to increase, we started seeing impacts. And the population went from roughly 400 in 1965 and 69 in that arena to around 5,800 in 2003. And then around 2012 was estimated about 27,000 animals. And now in 2018, we have somewhere probably around 50,000. Well, that's roughly growth of about 13% a year, and the impact that they have is the amount and volume of foods that they have to eat to stay alive. They have a very low fat content, and it's roughly 25% of their body weight a day. And these animals are large. They could be 60, 100 pounds. They're good size. Well, they eat crabs, they're easy to get, sea urchins, geoduck clams, razor clams, any of those type of things until they're completely gone. And then they eat the starfish. And as we all know, the starfish is one of the least desirable foods to put on anybody's table. But you'll see sea otters eating those on the verge of starvation. Well, they continue to devour everything. They take the bottom, and it looks like a bombing range out of a big military effort. There's nothing left on the bottom but craters. And Fish and Game has come back almost a decade later and reviewed some of these areas, and they don't bounce back. They get impacted. Well, when you have that type of an impact, you eliminate the virtual fisheries that have taken place, if it's Dungeness crab fisheries or urgent fisheries or what have you, clam fisheries. And there's been about 17 fisheries that have been closed to those impacts. The sea otters have moved, Mr. President, from the outer coast, and they're surrounding the bottom end of southeast in a pincer movement, heading to Ketchikan and the great red sea urchin grounds that lay on the bottom of southeast. They're going in through Peril Straits into the center. They're coming up through Duncan Canal in those areas, which is kind of in the heart of southeast. They moved into those a couple weeks ago. And they're pretty much eliminating all of the shellfish in those bays and displacing a lot of our commercial fisheries. But in also doing so, we have a large percentage of people in southeast, Mr. President, that live a subsistence lifestyle. They don't go to Fred Meyer's buy their dinner. They go down to the beach at low tide, or they go into the forest and hunt. They go out in the ocean and fish, and have so for eons. Well, there's areas that you can't now go and get shellfish because they don't exist. You can't go dig clams because they've all been eaten up. And we are seeing a substantial impact on our subsistence lifestyle in Southeast. So when we take a look, at this growth and it's going on with this nice, warm, cuddly creature that we don't want to, don't misinterpret what I'm saying, we don't want to eliminate them, eradicate them. That's been done 100 and some years ago, and it wasn't a good idea then, and certainly not a good idea now. But we want to manage the growth of them and slow it down. And we want to share the abundance of Mother Nature with them. We are not the invasive species, Mr. President. We should be able to go dig a clam and go catch a crab. So we're looking for some balance. But if we take a look at how to balance these mammals under the Marine Mammal Act, it's very difficult. As an Alaska native, you could harvest them. A coastal native, you could harvest a certain number of them, and that's, I think, roughly 10% of the expected numbers. I think that's correct, somewhere in that range. But anyway, in 2012, the allowable harvest was around 2,200, slightly under that, about 21 animals under that, but just say 2,200, and we harvested 1,000, or basically 46% of the allowable harvest in 2012. And then we had some incentives here, and we worked on it, this process here in the Senate several years ago. We got the harvest rate the following year in 2013 up to 1,494, 1,500 animals. And we thought we were going to make some impact, slow down the growth and the impact. We're not going to stop it or turn it around, but slow it down so we can manage it a little more. Well, we've gone from roughly that 1,500 in 2013 down to 882 in 2017. A decline of 41% in 4 years in the harvest. So our harvest rates are going down. The population base grows at an estimated rate of 13% a year. So you have an allowable take that used to be in 2012 about 2,000 animals to 17 at about 6,300, 6,400 animals. The allowable take numbers have gone from, again, 2,200 to, say, 6,200. But the take numbers have gone down to 882, dropped to 14% of the allowable take. So they're breeding and expanding at a rate that we can't keep up with, and they're overrunning our crab grounds, our urchin grounds, and the friends of the starfish, if there is such a group, they're eating even those. So this resolution asks for some help. Clearly the federal government can't do it. They've been in control of it for years, and we see what action has come out of their inaction. So we've asked in this resolution that we have some co-management ability, the state of Alaska, native groups, to work together to try to minimize the impact of these animals. We don't want to, again, eradicate them. They are very desirable for helping our tourist industry. Most of the tourists come into Alaska want to see whales, icebergs and glaciers and sea otters. And I enjoy watching them also. But I also enjoy being able to go out and get a crab and boil it on the beach, or go down and dig up some clams and make some clam fritters and feed my family. And I would just as soon be able to keep that type of lifestyle that's been going on in Southeast for hundreds of thousands of years. With that, Mr. President, this is a pretty straightforward resolution. It points out to the inaction that we get out of the federal government. We've also had some problems with the federal government in defining what a significantly altered is. If you harvest these animals, you have to be a coastal Alaska Native. That should be expanded to any Alaska Native. And the significantly altered definition needs to be loosened. When you take and go elk hunting or moose hunting or reindeer hunting, and you harvest an animal and you skin it, and you cut it up, put it in a white package and put it in your freezer, I'd say that's significantly altered. You take a sea otter, you shoot it, and you skin it, you haven't altered it yet, significantly, by the federal government's definition. So that needs to be modified. If we take the ability of the regulations and we allow the flexibility that is available to the federal government to modify some of those, we could help alleviate some of the concerns with just the definition of significantly altered. The Alaska Natives that harvest these animals should be able to skin them and have them tanned, in my opinion, sell the hides without having made into traditional crafts. And I'd like to remind the federal government one of the traditional crafts was a tanned hide. That's what they traded in the Russian era. So we're not talking about anything different that's been done in the past. We're talking about some interpretation from some Washington bureaucrats and how they're imposing their will on the citizens of Alaska. With that, Mr. President, I urge the support of this resolution. Again, it is not for eradication and annihilation of all the sea otters. It's to slow down the growth of them, to allow Alaska Natives throughout the state to harvest these animals and to trade their tanned hides and better ensure that we have a subsistence lifestyle that stays intact in Southeast Alaska and across the state, and also some resemblance of our historic shellfish fisheries. Thank you, Mr. President.